for different scenarios. And you keep our records.
I think it's great.
It's good too. But we'll never remember it.
Oh, wait, but I'm good. How are you?
You guys all have special man?
I know Lord, I get to be a girl or I was too. Isn't it hot out there? I have to take my mask off. Like, something's got to happen. The mask is coming off, or I'm going down. Your mask matches. What? Your mask matches.
Which part of that right that you agree with me?
I'd like to borrow, but we're not supposed to share masks.
You almost scared me. Is there really true?
I talked to my rugby friend today, and she said that the St. Louis Soups decided at 2 o'clock during their Zoom that they are still going to release all their information on Monday, regardless of what the so they're not going to wait too long.
Thank you. I guess the module was because
I fixed it, but I didn't fix it before. And maybe their plan is we're just going to go ahead and do it. We have to take it.
Why, then we can use it in the front row all the time. I don't know how it's coming, I got this one.
With it being 6:34, I'd like to call the meeting to order. I apologize for the lateness. Call the meeting to order with a pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the agenda for July 16th, 2020 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We will now be moving on to patron comments. During patron comments, patrons and staff are invited to address the Board of Education. Please come to the podium so everyone can hear and adhere to the 3-minute timeline. The board is interested in hearing the public's concerns and opinions. We do not respond to comments or questions during the meeting. Questions and concerns will be addressed by Dr. Hoban and other appropriate staff members. Please remember, comments about individual students or staff are not allowed due to confidentiality. These concerns need to be brought into administration's attention and may be brought to the board in closed session. Okay, our first patron comment will be Jeannie Wilkins.
Good evening. My name is Janie Wilkins, and I live in the Francis Howell School District. I've also been a teacher in the district for almost 20 years. I was recently a part of the teacher group that organized the Black Voices Matter in FHSD March and Rally. I come to you tonight to thank so many school board administrators and board members who participated in and supported the Black Voices Matter March and Rally. Whether you sent us messages, came to the event, provided water, or have been listening to the ongoing conversation, your support has been wonderful. A concern I do have, though, is that the support is often quiet. It happens behind the scenes. It happens in private messages and emails and in phone calls. Tonight, I want to encourage school administrators and board members to come out from behind the scenes. Real change can never happen in our world unless we are willing to be brave and bold in the face of scrutiny. In fact, I would argue that most positive changes happen when we can listen to one another, learn from each other's stories and stances, and then lead the way for change. I know we have some amazing leadership in the Francis Howell School District, and I also know that those same leaders go above and beyond for kids on a day-to-day basis. Let's also go above and beyond to make our voices heard when it comes to Black and Brown community members and the racism they often experience in our community. Let's be bold when it comes to standing up against racism. Let's not hide in the shadows anymore when we know something is morally wrong and is hurting our students and our community. I also ask that we be bold about our response to COVID-19. I ask that we come out from behind the scenes and start to make some open decisions about how to reopen our school district. From the many people I have heard from, be they parents, teachers, students, and other community members, one of the most difficult things about being on the outside of reopening schools during a pandemic is that we just aren't hearing anything about how the process will go. I completely understand that this is an ever-changing situation and that one day the data may show numbers that later change. I ask that you continue to call on all groups, just as you did in organizing task forces, to consider how we will reopen our schools. I know that so many of us as teachers are desperate to get back to working with our students again. But we can't work with our students when we're concerned not only with our students' health, but our own health and our family's health. Please consider providing a virtual learning option or a potential hybrid approach to reopening schools until we know that the COVID-19 numbers are going down. If and when we are able to reopen the schools, please consider what that will look like for so many of my colleagues who care for elderly parents, have people in their homes with pre-existing conditions, have those conditions themselves, have people that they are caring for, making them very vulnerable to COVID-19. And especially consider our schools in the way they are currently set up. I teach in a classroom that is about 900 square feet in size. In that classroom, I often have at least one section of students numbering as many as 32. I did a rough look in here, and it appears that my classroom would probably cover
Your time is up.
a third of this space.
Thank you, your time is up.
We need distancing and masks.
Next, we have Patrick Keller.
Hello, my name is Patrick Keller. I teach vocal music and music production and technology at Savior Middle School. And I am afraid to return to my classroom next month while our country is reporting a surge in coronavirus cases. And I don't understand why returning is even being considered an option. I'd like to take us back to March 16th and an email that I received as an employee of the district. Spring break had just begun, and we learned from the district that students would not be returning to school and instead would be learning online in order to, quote, help minimize the impact of the coronavirus. There was a lot of uncertainty about if and when we would be returning to our classrooms, and we still don't know. What has changed in the 122 days since then that would lead us to believe that it is now safe to return to our school buildings. Here are a few things that have changed. Back then, we hadn't had our first confirmed case yet in St. Charles County. Today, we recorded our 2,000th case, and that number is rapidly climbing. Back then, less than 3% of cases in the county were people under 20 years old. Today, they make up almost 10% of cases. Back then, the majority of known exposures in the county were in long-term care facilities. Today, the largest known source of exposure is from contact in the community. Speaking of community spread, I've checked my rosters for first quarter, and my largest choir class has 46 students, which is typical for a normal school year. I don't have the time to talk with you about the impossible task of social distancing 46 students in a classroom, let alone the study that found that singing produces 6 times the number of droplets as speaking and propels them much further than 6 feet. Back on March 16th, when there wasn't even a confirmed case yet in the county, you told us that we were shifting to online learning to minimize the impact of the coronavirus. Today, with the virus spreading exponentially, it's even more important for you to protect the lives of your staff and students by keeping school buildings closed. Thank you.
We have also received patron comments via the online submission form. I will now turn it over to our Director of Communications to read those comments aloud so that I, along with the rest of the board, can focus on the messages being shared. If time limits don't allow us to get through them all, the remainder of the comments will be shared with the board and executive cabinet electronically following the board meeting. Jennifer?
Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Joels, Director of Communications, and I'll start with our first comment from Dawn Kretschmer. As a parent who works full-time outside of the home, it is vital that school reopen full-time in August. I do not have the resources to teach my child new subjects and expect any type of quality outcome. I work for a large nationwide bank and appreciate that they allowed us to work from home from March and through August. Their generosity and concern for my family's safety is much appreciated. However, even working from home, it was a struggle to complete my work duties and cover the necessary schoolwork for my child. It affected my production significantly. Not to mention that, as I struggled to give my child the best attention I could manage, it was very obvious that other parents were doing literally nothing. Many kids are already struggling and require the resources of an experienced teacher and a classroom environment. Let's not forget that we are paying out of our noses to cover the annual increases in our local taxes, a large percentage of which go directly to the district, not to mention those affected financially by COVID. The increase in child care for many would be devastating. If there are some who wish to homeschool their children, then they are free to do so. But for most of us, it is simply not an option. The next comment was from Victoria Ross. Please start school in person this year. According to the AAP, it is imperative that children get in-person education. The mental health consequences I've seen in my own children and other children that I've worked with is horrifying. As a support staff member, I'm ready to return with PPE. Please make students wear masks and follow other in-person guidelines suggested by the State Board of Education as facilities allow. In addition, please provide Canvas as an option for families that don't want to attend in person. A combination of the two will not work. Parents can't tell their jobs, I can't work today because it's my first grader's day to be off of school. It is not realistic, and families cannot provide the education a teacher can while trying to do their full-time job. Daycares are also limited, so you will see children most in need at home by themselves at extremely young ages. Please allow children to go back that want to go back. Provide an online option for families that do not want to go, and consider allowing teachers with underlying conditions to do the online learning aspect and team teach. I am ready to return to my duties. Next comment is from Tracy Wagner. As a parent, I would love to send my kids to school this fall, but as a medical provider, I am increasingly seeing this as a potentially unwise decision. While I completely agree that children need the socialization the school environment offers, and I truly understand the many benefits outside of education a school provides to the community as a whole, I cannot in good confidence say we have enough information to take the chance of a wrong decision at this time. Much of the data on children is showing a lower infection rate and death rate. However, that data has also been collected largely while children have been at home with camp and school closed, many sports canceled, and no extra activities to go to. I believe that unless serious steps are taken to protect not only the students, but also the staff at the schools, we will find ourselves in another shutdown in very short order. I realize from a mental health perspective, school is an important outlet to reduce stress and anxiety in children. But even in my own practice, I am finding that many mental health providers I refer patients to are also working virtually and seeing patients digitally rather than in person. Surely there is some amount of guidance that should be taken from that if the mental health profession feels that virtual is best even for one-on-one interaction. As a county resident, I was truly hopeful when this chaos began that my fellow citizens would do the right thing, stay home, distance, wear masks, and that we'd be in a much better position for returning to school. Unfortunately, that has not happened, as one only has to go to any number of stores in our area or even to a local ball field to see safety measures are largely being ignored. At a minimum, I would be hopeful Francis Howell will lead the way and set the example for other districts. If in-person classes are desired, offer smaller groups, require masks at a minimum in the secondary levels, and have a solid action plan the very first time someone is ill. Leave no gray area so that we're not in a similar confusing situation as we were in the spring. I'm also hopeful the district will also offer virtual options for those who choose, and I hope those children will still be supported by the district and not forgotten. My suggestion would be to set up small grade level cohorts or class level for high school of online students so they have peers to work with and a sense of community during this time. I also urge parents to step up and find ways to transport your children to school if you are able, so as to free up space on our buses. Many of our drivers are over 65 and in higher risk categories. Many are frightened of the prospect of returning this year. It is not acceptable to simply say they either put themselves at risk or quit. They are valued members of our school community and are no more disposable than our teachers. I greatly appreciate Francis Howell taking time to hear community concerns, and I'm hopeful to have a safe start to school. All right, next comment is from Mindy Resnick. Good afternoon. I appreciate all of the hard work that you, our board, and all the district members have been doing to build our reentry plan for this 2020-2021 school year. I am writing to advocate for virtual learning for, at minimum, our first quarter, as COVID-19 cases in St. Charles have been consistently rising. This will be my 16th year in the district, and as the loving and compassionate teacher that I strive to be, I am extremely worried for the health and safety of the students, teachers, and families that will fall victim to sickness if we go back into in-person learning too soon. Personally, both my brother and sister-in-law were some of the first people in New York to have COVID-19 back in March. As of today, they are still going to physical therapy and counseling to work through the physical and mental after effects of COVID-19. This is a terrifying and long-lasting virus, and I wouldn't wish it on a single individual. Please make the right decision and have us participate in district virtual learning, followed by a hybrid model with required masks upon return to reduce the number of students in the classroom. In the very least, masks must be required, which I'm aware is not part of the current plan. The only way to prevent otherwise inevitable sickness and death is to make the educated and safe decisions. In conclusion, the decision should be simple. We should be putting our students and their families' health first. Thank you. Next comment is from Carrie Wilhite. I would like to respectfully request that the district and board consider the health of all staff members, students, and families as they make the final decision about making decisions regarding reopening the schools. Many staff members have underlying health conditions or have family members in their homes that are at risk. I don't want to have to explain to students why we lost a student or staff member to this horrible pandemic. Next comment is from Constance Bedsworth. Please make it mandatory for students to wear masks while in school. I am a high-risk person, as is my husband, but I still want to teach in the classroom. Doctors are concerned about my health if kids are not required to wear face masks. Don't put convenience above everyone's health. Next comment is from Susan Niederberger. I am writing to you today because I am concerned about the possible reopening of our school buildings happening too soon. As of this writing, 7 p.m. July 15th, St. Charles County has experienced an increase of 468% in the number of confirmed cases in the last 14 days. The county has seen an increase of 140% in the number of people who have had to be quarantined in the last 14 days. This data is from the St. Charles County Health Department. The data shows that COVID-19 is prevalent among the residents of St. Charles County. Reopening school buildings with numbers this high is not safe. Every day we are learning more about the virus, what it does to adults, what it does to children, and that it can have long-term effects. Instead of taking the risky approach of reopening buildings, knowing that children and adults will contract COVID-19 and we will have to close buildings again, let's follow the lead of school districts in California, Kansas, and all across the nation who are delaying opening their buildings until later in the fall. If our buildings do reopen, know that people will get sick. Who will it be? Which of my colleagues will get sick? Will any of them die? Will I get sick? There are endless questions if we reopen buildings too soon. It is not safe yet. I realize there's pressure to reopen school buildings as there are concerns about child supervision. The solution is not to put us into buildings with 900 other people. I thank the people who dedicated so much time and effort into the task forces this summer. I realize that we are aiming at a moving target, and I implore you to put the safety of students and staff first in this difficult decision. Next comment is from Jessica Bruntz. St. Charles County is now being named a hotspot for positive COVID cases with a recent 400% spike in cases. How does this affect the district's reopening plans? Next comment is from Melissa Rungblue to the Francis Howell School District School Board. Thank you for taking my comment for the July 16, 2020 meeting. I am a FHSD resident and taxpayer, and while I do not have children in the district, my husband and I and the community benefit from the service you provide to create the informed citizenry of the future. I bring to you my concern about FHSD schools reopening in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our county council leaders, state representatives, and national leaders believe that schools need to reopen in order to get the economy going again. I feel that it is unfair to use our children and teachers as pawns in a political game. The reality, no matter how difficult it is to accept, is that this virus is going to impact the economy whether or not kids are in school. There is no easy way to measure the economic impact of kids in school versus kids out of school. So I argue that we should not fall so easily for this claim that is made without any evidence. So let's look at what we do know. What we do know is that the novel coronavirus is more easily spread indoors where people have prolonged contact. For the safety of the parents, teachers, staff, and children of any school district, that alone should make one take pause. Unless the school has unlimited space available by which to spread students out 6 feet or more and the capacity to deal with the additional stress caused by all of the preventative measures which must be adhered to, schools shouldn't reopen in the fall. I propose there may be one way to get schools to reopen, and that is to pressure our political leadership to close the bars, restaurants, and other indoor spaces where the virus easily spreads, and to require masks while outside of the home. If we do this now, there will still be at least 2 weeks of quarantine time before schools need to reopen. While painful, these measures can still keep most businesses open, allowing the economy to continue the best it can. I admit that there are no easy answers to the question about reopening schools. Kids need an education, and many need the free meals schools provide. Parents need to work. Teachers need to be able to instruct and not have anxiety added to all of the stresses they currently endure. What is easy is for our leaders to say, reopen the schools. That means they don't have to think about creating solutions to our problem. It means that they don't have to look for additional money for the school systems to upgrade infrastructures and remote learning capabilities. It means that they don't have to think about what other solutions might be viable to feed hungry kids. Just send them to school and all will be okay. I hear our elected officials say it's about the kids all the time. Well, now is the time for them to truly show that they can make the tough decisions, the kinds of decisions that may be unpopular but are necessary for the greater good. I urge the school board to pressure the St. Charles County Council to take the tough measures necessary to ensure safe schools this fall. Close the bars, restaurants, and other indoor gathering locations necessary to slow the spread of the virus and mandate mask wearing outside of the home. This is a small sacrifice to make until we get a vaccine, which will truly allow us to get the economy going again. Next comment is from Katie Schottmuller. The 2020-2021 school year will take place during a global pandemic. The COVID-19 virus is currently spreading in our community. I implore the school board to place the health and safety of students, staff, and the community as their top priority when considering how to resume learning this fall. Next comment is from Julie Ball. We need communication from the district on the plan for this upcoming school year. What are you doing to ensure you are following CDC guidelines for school openings? Are you planning virtual school days? Next comment is from Richard Sullivan. What has changed since March when you shut down the schools that makes you feel that it is safer now? Cases are higher in both Missouri and St. Charles County. There is very little research on how the virus is spread by children. There is still a shortage of testing supplies and long delays in getting results. Knowing these things, how can you say that it is safe to go back to school safely? Please keep the safety of students and staff at the front of your decision on attending school in the fall. Next comment is from Dina Fisher. I know this is a difficult decision, and I don't think there is a right answer in this scenario. I do think there needs to be more parent involvement in the decision-making process on how we will teach our children. The survey that went out was very basic. It didn't cover how the parents will need to support our children during the school year. I believe everyone did the best they could during the fourth quarter last year. I saw teachers spending so much extra time trying to do the curriculum. But there are issues at home with learning. I want my kids to go to school. They want to go back to school. But the problem is that I don't feel it's safe, and I feel the schools should not be bullied by politicians, but listen to people who are educated in science, like physicians, epidemiologists, public health officials, etc. Masking is not enough. Hand sanitizer is not enough. How will the students hear and learn from the teachers if masked? What are you going to do if the middle and high school, if at the middle and high school, the amount of kids changing classrooms will multiply the numbers of exposure by the hundreds? We see how quickly infectious bacterial and virus infections run through school and then into the families. We tell people to stay home when sick, and yet they go into the setting anyway because it is more difficult to make up the work on a day you miss. The option of either check the box of A, you go to school, or B, you learn at home, needs some compromise and a hybrid approach. Parents must be part of the discussion on how their kids will best learn independently. We can't have 7 different systems for the kids to access and parents trying to learn on the fly. Canvas, Schoolology, Google Classroom, Splash Math, Prodigy, all may be good systems, but accessing it was challenging. And we need to stick to the basics and not give the kids all of this busy work if they are at home. As a parent working a full-time job, it's difficult to monitor everything and to support their learning. I want to do it, but things got really real when I couldn't due to work commitments, and the stress at home is not worth it. The mental health of the children and family is as important as an education. The fact that my daughter learns differently and needs a lot of support in her learning means I need something more individualized that won't fit how a lot of the programs are putting together or how a Zoom meeting goes. Let's remember this is a critical public health issue. The health, safety, and well-being of our students is the #1 priority. Then the close second is education. So we need to work together on how our kids can learn. A standard one-size-fits-all is not going to work. This is the time to be creative, but you must involve the parents in how our kids learn and can be successful. I know that makes it more difficult, but I can tell you we need improvements and we need to simplify to make sure all are trained on the technology, including the parents. Let us know ahead of time what to expect so we can be in front of the issue and not behind in chasing assignments. Let's remember we are all involved and that not all kids can be self-sufficient. Do not give busy work to cover the assignments and check the box. If it's necessary, then do it. If not, skip it. Bottom line, #1, involve the parents early in how they will need to access technology. Do not assume the kids know how to do it or will do it on their own. Most won't, so the parents have to get into the system and help them find out what they need to do. #2, remember the kids on the individualized learning plans. This is very tough on them. Consider breaking into groups and not
Thank you,
pushing
the time is up.
Next comment is from Nicholas Bulow. Our son will be starting kindergarten this year. These children thrive with boundaries and a strong foundation, which in-person learning provides. At 5 or 6 years old, most have very little understanding of computers and lack the patience to sit through e-learning. We as parents did not go to college to be teachers. Many of us have careers which provide for our families. We do not have the ability to give children the education that a school district can provide. Our 8-year-old daughter is entering 3rd grade this year. She struggled with e-learning at the end of the year, both emotionally and physically. Often the connection wasn't the best during a Zoom meeting or whatever platform they were using. She missed the emotional and social aspects that only in-person schooling can provide. The fact remains that this illness has an extremely low fatality rate. I still don't understand how this shut everything down in the first place. Complete overkill from day one. If there are teachers willing to teach, let them teach. If there are some with health concerns, let them do the e-learning for those who still have concerns for their children. Shutting the school down again is completely unnecessary. Options need to be available to meet the needs of families. In-person learning, e-learning, and a hybrid of both would accommodate everyone. Next comment is from Daniel Marion. Dear Francis House School Board, I am currently an employee, a student parent, and a Francis House School District resident. I am writing about a concern that I have related to the possibility that employees and students may return to school under a full or hybrid model of attendance, either in person or virtually. My concern is that if masks are required to initiate this return to school safely, what is the plan to handle those students who will not comply with this requirement? In our schools, we have a population of students who will willfully push the boundaries of school and classroom rules and expectations. In order to facilitate a safe return to school on any level, please consider what is to be done to address those students who refuse to comply with wearing a mask. There will also be a population of students who will not only push the boundaries of mask usage, those students will also purposely cough with an open mouth on others, spit on them, or put their mouth on peers and teachers' supplies and other personal items. I believe that our board and administration needs to consider collaboratively a plan for addressing these situations at all grade levels, elementary, middle, and high school. What will be the consequences for the student who exhibits this type of dangerous behavior during our current COVID-19 pandemic situation? How will staff safely educate a student who is refusing to comply or purposely physically spreading germs? How will the school staff that have to respond to a non-compliant student guarantee the safety of other staff and all other students who are potentially impacted in the classroom, hallways, and other common areas during these situations? Next comment is from Mackenzie Rossi. FHSD consistently makes carefully informed decisions in the best interest of our students, our staff, and our community at large. I am proud to be part of the FHSD team as an educator and as a community member. As we discuss reopening plans, I implore you to continue to make the best decisions by beginning the school year virtually. The number of COVID cases has risen 436% over the last 14 days in St. Charles County, which is the largest growth in the metropolitan area. We know that the normal school we'd all like to start cannot and will not be the school we see in the fall if we return. Try to imagine the anxiety of being a teenager at school who is not allowed to mingle with your peers. In science, you're not able to complete labs because that would involve sharing equipment within 6 feet of your peers. The kid who sits behind you in math is homesick today, and you wonder if you've been exposed. You worry. You arrive in English not seeing your teacher's welcoming, smiling face, and instead you're greeted by a teacher behind a mask and a face shield. In class, you aren't able to think, pair, share with your elbow partner because you don't have one. Because you're all isolated in the same room together. Returning to school does not mean returning to normal. Even if we return in person, teachers will need to rely on technology for student collaboration and student work submission. We might even have to pre-record videos of our lessons, which would allow students not only to hear us better, but also to see our faces and to see us smile. We may need to take questions from the front of the classroom and move away from circulating the room while actively facilitating group work, which would be a move so fundamentally against our pedagogical experience that pedagogical expertise that it hurts. Our efforts to make our physical classroom safe and collaborative may lead us to mirror many characteristics of the virtual model, but with an increased risk of transmission. So why take the risk? FHSD is armed with a team of passionate educators who are working hard this summer to prepare for what the fall may bring. The online learning this spring could more accurately be described as emergency learning. Now, months later, as a district, we have new creative ideas and logistical solutions. We can provide full-time, rigorous, quality education for our students virtually. We can support our students' academic, social, and emotional needs virtually. We can build classroom community virtually. This is a public health crisis. As a public school district, we have the responsibility of looking out for the health and safety of our students, our staff, and our community. It is our duty to make the right decision. The stakes are too high. We already have exponentially growing transmission of COVID in St. Charles County, even before reopening campuses. Please listen when we say we are concerned. Please stand strong against opposition and follow the science when making a public health decision. Please stand up for the safety of all stakeholders by keeping campuses closed until COVID is not spreading rampantly in our area. FHSD is strong. Let's continue to be progressively dedicated to doing the right thing. That is the end.
FHEA comments?
Good evening, board and executive cabinet, Dr. Hoban. First, I want to start off by thanking you for working with the teachers and FHEA. We truly want to continue to work together. And this letter comes because of the change in what is happening in the county. So I don't want you to think that we weren't sincere in the work that we did in the task forces. So, and So the Francis Howell Education Association would like to communicate our desire to every teacher, staff member, student, and their families to be kept safe during this global pandemic. For this reason, we support a virtual return rather than return to our school buildings in August. One of the best things about Francis Howell School District is that we use relevant data to drive our decisions. The current data shows that COVID-19 cases in St. Charles County are increasing exponentially. This virus is highly contagious, and even the St. Charles County Health Department's advice on Tuesday, July 14th, shows play dates and group hangouts are activities that the county believes residents should avoid. Hallways, classrooms, lunchrooms, buses would be equivalent to these kinds of activities. Additionally, the ventilation systems in many buildings are not adequate to combat the airborne illness. Because schools have been closed during the outbreak, we believe that the rate of spread when children are in large groups has not yet been tested. FHEA is not comfortable with putting our students and ourselves at risk to find out. The push for schools to return in person learning at the beginning of the school year leads us to believe that districts are making the following statement. While we know it is unsafe for staff and students, and we know that some people will die as a result, we intend to reopen our buildings anyway. Notice that I said districts, not just this district. In response to this, FHEA leadership team implores the district to maximize safety for our students and staff and community while still providing a high-quality education. We propose a phased return to school that includes virtual learning for all students through at least the end of the first quarter with a reevaluation based on community health data, hybrid learning with masks beginning in the second quarter, contingent on improving community health data as related to COVID-19, with reevaluation of the data at semester to see how long hybrid learning will need to continue. A virtual learning option should be offered through the 2021 school year so that all families can make the best choice for their own circumstances. We realize
Your
that
time is up.
I don't.
She doesn't.
Okay.
I'm sorry. We realize that the decision about reopening schools depends on many factors, but the trends in St. Charles County are not something that we can ignore. As of the St. Charles County Council meeting on July 13th, the county has not implemented any more plans to slow the spread in the community. The lives of our students and staff must come first. FHE is calling on the school board and the district administration to stand united with us to make the right decision. We cannot reopen school buildings when we know we are taking a chance that we will sacrifice the life of even one student or staff member. In solidarity, FHEA leadership, we thank you for your consideration in all of these matters. I know it's a very difficult decision, but that's how we feel at this time. Thank you.
Peacepa? Okay, I would like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I would like to make a motion to approve the personnel report as presented.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Would you like to give a reason for your?
There's a family member.
Now we are moving on to the MSBA July board report.
and welcome to the Missouri School Boards Association's Board Report for the month of July. We thank you for the opportunity to share some news and information during a few minutes of your board meeting. We begin with a look at the challenging task of reopening school buildings in Missouri. School districts throughout the state are developing and implementing plans to reopen schools after they were closed for much of the spring as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Those plans vary considerably throughout the state depending on local circumstances. The executive director of the Missouri chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, Kelsey Thompson, says in addition to health and safety concerns, it's important for schools to prepare for the emotional issues students may be facing as they return to school.
Be prepared to be able to recognize some of those signs of depression, especially in teens and older children, but just also recognizing that the transition back to school could be difficult for some children, experiencing anxiety from what has happened and what they've been hearing in the news. So having some things in place to provide accommodations for children that may need a little bit more of a gentle reintroduction, and also offering that space for children to be able to talk about their feelings and emotions.
Thompson made her comments during a panel discussion at MSBA's Igniting Great Ideas Summit that was held virtually on June 19th. MSBA continues to update its Pandemic Recovery Considerations document that includes information on a wide range of issues related to the reopening of schools. That document is posted on the MSBA website. Another session at the summit focused on the homework gap, an issue that's been apparent for quite some time, but that has become more urgent as schools have turned to virtual instruction while school buildings have been closed. More than 20% of Missouri's public school students do not have adequate internet access at home, according to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. A member of the Federal Communications Commission, Jessica Rosenworcel, participated in a discussion of the homework gap during the Igniting Great Ideas Summit, and she believes the federal government's E-rate program should be updated to ensure every student has adequate internet access at home.
And I hope that this crisis, something comes out of it, which is we decide it's a national objective to close the homework gap, that every child should be connected at home. You know, it was used to be leave no child behind, now I'm leave no child offline. Every kid should be connected at home. And I'm actually a little bit hopeful that we're gonna walk out of this crisis and recognize that that is a national necessity.
Another participant in that discussion was Dr. Nicole Turner-Lee, a researcher with the Brookings Institution and an expert on the digital divide. She says schools should consider what she calls a remote access plan for students.
I'm suggesting to all of you, let's create digital parks. Let's find ways in the discussion around reopening to create Wi-Fi hotspots in and around the school so that kids can do their homework in dignity, particularly if they're left behind. Or find a local church or some other aspect in your digital community, in your community, to become empowered and emboldened enough to help with your connectivity needs. I guess my question is, as we go forward, if schools are not thinking about that remote access part, we're going to find ourselves back to the same conversation. And I think that's where none of us really want to be. We've lost so much time in the classroom.
The new president of the Missouri School Boards Association is Linda Doherty, a school board member from Nixa. She became MSBA president following the Igniting Great Ideas Summit, having served as president-elect for the past year. During her remarks at the virtual delegate assembly, held in conjunction with the summit, she said strong school board leadership continues to be essential to the success of Missouri's public schools.
As school board members, we are governors and visionaries. Our students are counting on our leadership to put them first, to make hard decisions that will continue the legacy of strong public schools, where every child in our community and our state receives an excellent education for an extraordinary life.
Other state officers for the next year elected at the delegate assembly are President-elect Nancy Masterson of the Camdenton Board of Education and Vice President John Craig of the Crawford County R1 Board of Education. Rhonda Gilstrap of Blue Springs served as MSBA president for the past year and now becomes immediate past president. The Delegate Assembly also approved a change in MSBA's purpose statement at its virtual meeting on June 19th. The purpose statement now reads, "Helping school boards ensure all students succeed." Plans continue for the 2020 MSBA Annual Conference in cooperation with the Missouri Association of School Administrators to be held September 24th through 27th in Kansas City. The event will once again feature numerous sessions and workshops, many presented by school leaders from districts throughout the state, all in a new location at the Kansas City Convention Center. Registration for the 2020 Annual Conference opened on the MSBA website on June 1st. And don't forget the 2020 Safe Schools and Colleges Forum, sponsored by MSBA Center for Education Safety, will be held this year in conjunction with the annual conference in Kansas City. That's it for this month's edition of the MSBA Board Report. Thanks for allowing us to have some time at your board meeting, and so long from Columbia.
Okay, next we're going to move on to the academic high targets. The motion to approve the 2021-2022 school year calendar as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Do we have any discussion? Or?
Yep, just something brief. For planning purposes, we like to have calendars approved 2 years in advance. The 21-22 calendar would have been approved typically back in December when the revised 2021 calendar was brought forward. We held on getting board approval as there was some concern of new legislative changes. Now that the session has ended and no new laws regarding school calendars have come forward, we are recommending the 21-22 calendar for approval. It was created by the calendar committee and is identical to the 2021 calendar, with the exception that the Friday before Easter returns to a non-student contact day.
Any questions, board? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, now I'd like to make a motion to approve the purchases over $7,500 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, now we will have our Prop S update. Mr. Supple.
Thank you, Mrs. Lang. Just a few things that I'd like to highlight. We are beginning the process now of developing a schedule that will take a look at the projects that were identified in the Phase 1 and Phase 2 documents that were a large part of the Prop S campaign. And now we'll try to combine those into meaningful packages so that the work that is similarly situated will be bid together in order to drive the greatest value. So we have begun that work. I've included in the report that was attached to board docs some very high-level scheduled dates. It gives us an opportunity to begin to share some news about how work is going to be completed. Of course, Francis Howell North is listed as our #1 project, and we'll take the next several months to begin the design of that work. As with Francis Howell North, as with any other package that includes a significant addition to one of our school buildings, we will be inviting a lot of staff and student input so that they have an opportunity to learn about and provide feedback on our ideas about those new spaces. This schedule, of course, will be continually updated as we move forward. Then I do have a couple things that I wanted to discuss with the board, get some feedback and some input. The first is just an update about the first series of bonds that will be issued. So, as you know, Proposition S authorized the sale of $244 million of general obligation bonds that will fund the various capital improvements that have been outlined in the documents associated with Proposition S. Again, we will, as we shared during the campaign, we will be issuing those bonds periodically over the next several years because we want to make sure that we're able to service the principal and interest payments with the existing debt service levy. But we are planning right now to issue the first series of bonds. The Series 2020 bonds will be $100 million of the $244 million that were approved, and will allow us to make significant progress on projects that are indicated as Phase 1 projects. The good news is that the bond market is still very favorable for issuers in terms of low interest rates, so we're in a very favorable position for issuing that debt right now. We are currently working with Stifel Nicholas as our underwriter and have been, in fact, I was in conversation with Mr. Lorenzo Boyd just this afternoon to talk about this upcoming Series 2020 issue. And so one of the advantages that we have in working with Stifel Nicholas is that they do have a local office located in O'Fallon, Missouri. So if residents of Francis Howell School District are interested in purchasing some of the bonds that are associated with Proposition S, it's another way that the community has an opportunity to support the school district, and hopefully it will be something that will be beneficial for their portfolio as well. So if anyone is interested, Stifel Nicholas office in O'Fallon, Missouri would be happy to assist anyone in purchasing some of the bonds that will be issued. So the process, of course, is that we will bring a bond purchase agreement to the board at the August meeting. If the board approves that bond purchase agreement, the bonds will subsequently be sold after the August meeting, and then we close on September 3rd. So on September 3rd, we will have our first distribution of cash. So we're very much looking forward to getting that accomplished. Any questions about the funding and what our plans are there? I did want to discuss with the board architectural services. As you might imagine, there's been a great deal of interest in from various architectural firms in working with the Francis Howell School District on the Proposition S projects. We have used for a number of years, since 2008, Honer Associates serving as our primary architect. They did essentially all of the work associated with the previous bond issue, and I found that they not only provide high quality work and exceptional customer service, but in my experience, we saw, relatively speaking, very few change orders, and that was really amazing given the scope and complexity of the various projects that were associated with the 2008 bond issue. And it really is a testament to the drawings that Horner does. If you do good drawings up front, general contractors have an opportunity to bid from a very informed perspective, and it reduces the amount of changes that are required in the field. So I am open to discussion with the board whether we should continue to utilize Honer as our primary architect, or if the board is interested in seeking proposals from other architectural firms to handle the work. I will also say that given the nature of the work, there are several packages that are probably separable in the sense that we could employ a civil design firm to do some of our parking lots and playgrounds, which would not necessarily fall under the purview of our principal architect. We may also hire a firm that would focus strictly on some of the HVAC repair work that needs to be done, which would also potentially not fall directly under the purview of our principal architect. So there are opportunities for other firms to be engaged, but We're at the state right now where if we're going to meet some of the timelines that we've established, I would like to have some direction from the board in terms of architectural services.
I was involved with the design team back in 2008, and we went through, and I can say from sitting through numerous meetings with the folks from Hohmann and Associates, there was a variety of different people on different projects. They were very receptive to our needs and wants, and if we said, well, this, I know you typically do this, but we want this for these reasons, or could you change this for this, they were always very receptive. A lot of the things that they were able to do were, we'd say, well, we want to do this, and they said, well, if you do this, it may cost you more, this and this and this. So they were always willing to give us an objective and an unbiased opinion, and they were very accommodating with our requests to make changes and tailor the specific plans for our specific needs. So I would recommend, we continue using a relationship with them based on past experience, at least.
I didn't have any experience back then, but I do know that they also were in charge of our facilities master plan, so they already know a lot of everything going on around here.
So I guess my question is, do we have like a ballpark estimate of what we think this contract for the architect is going to cost?
Architectural fees are structured based on whether it's new construction or renovation. And so I can get you an estimate based on the fee structure that Hohner has proposed if they were to do all of that work. But we are talking several $1 million of fees for architectural services.
So to me, not that I have any issue with Hohner or anything like that, but I think it makes sense for us to at least review bids when you're talking about millions of dollars. I know we've got time constraints and things like that, but do we ever go with contractors that are millions of dollars and not bid the work? We do.
Architects are one of the classes, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but architects are one of the classes that, their tech and entities have the ability to pick and choose those. The other issue that you have with it, it's very difficult to establish a bid package per se because of the different scope of work and that type of thing. I mean, they're all going to be very similar. It's like, if you go back to when we were picking the construction, management thing, the facilities management package, we had a variety of different companies that provided us options. And they varied, but they were all very, they were all very similar. So, I mean, I don't know that a bid, because, well, okay, are you bidding on this or that, is, you can't really bid a high school until you design it, the exact square footage and specifications. You're not going to have those numbers until you're done, I think.
Yeah, it is a qualifications process more than a hard bid approach. And I will say, and Mr. Hain may remember this, the board in preparing for the 2008 bond issue had begun work with a different architect. And to Mr. Hain's point earlier, the other architect did not get the message from the board about the direction for the new high school. They kept bringing back proposals that were not consistent with what the board wanted to do. And so we actually ended up changing firms kind of midstream. So I do think that I'm trying not to be overly influential in the conversation, but I will say that the knowledge of the comprehensive master plan, the overall low fee structure relative to what I've seen from other firms that Hohner uses, and their demonstrated willingness to be responsive to and revise their designs based on what the district wants, not the grand some architects want to build the Taj Mahal so they can say, look what I built. And what the Francis Howell School District wants is a serviceable school building that we can be proud of and that our residents can be proud of. And we're not too worried if it's winning a design award and featured in an architectural magazine. And I think that was a disconnect previously.
Thank you.
So is this the firm that designed Francis Howell?
That is correct.
And then there's some continuity with the master plan from
Yes.
that to the, so is it the same management, same team that we'll be working with?
Same team that did the work related on the comprehensive master plan will be the architects who are working with us on the design and completion of the projects under Proposition S.
Do we need to make the motion to?
We have an established relationship with Honer, and barring direction to do something different, I will proceed that Honer will serve as our primary architect. And we will make a decision together as to what packages, if any, it would make sense to utilize another firm. Because I do think there is some advantage to focusing on the expertise of a particular firm, particularly like a firm that specializes in civil engineering, because some of our work is strictly civil, which allows our principal architect to focus on the more complicated designs like the brand new high school or the addition to Henderson or some of the other projects. So we will try to find the appropriate mix, and Honer will certainly guide us. And through my intention is to bring some kind of a monthly update to the board. We may not always have a conversation about it, but I will try to provide updates just to make sure that the community understands how we're moving forward. We've already begun one project. That is, in fact, I think that is completed. It is the resurfacing of the parking lot at Warren Elementary School, which was identified in the Proposition S work. And we have the contractor understands that we won't have funds to pay until September the 3rd. But we wanted to take advantage of the summer months when kids were not in school to move forward. And the board has recently, or will tonight, approve work for the Hollenbeck track in order to move that forward so we can get that done before school starts. And one of the reasons that we're moving that forward is that it was in such bad shape that we wanted it to be usable for the school year, particularly given the fact that we will be encouraging our PE classes to be outside as much as possible. So that track becomes even more important this fall than perhaps in prior years.
Hey Kevin, I just have a question. I don't want to go backwards too far, but when we approved the purchase over 7,500 and some items were with Prop S funds, the roof at Henderson, which is like $500,000, is that Prop S funds?
No, I don't believe that that's Prop S.
Okay. Or the HVAC renovations?
We will continue to have some capital work that is regular maintenance work that needs to be completed that will dovetail into, but not necessarily be Proposition S work. And we will try to clearly identify those smaller things that might show up in purchases over 7,500. We'll try to clearly identify those if we bring them that way. Most typically, as we move forward, it will be approving a large bid package, so it'll be very obvious what's Proposition S. And I'm just going to, I believe John Klein is here, just double check the Henderson roof and the HVAC units, just general operating capital.
For the roof repair, yes, but there is a larger roof project that does need to be done on Henderson that will be a Prop S project.
So the work tonight was general operating capital.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to our work session. Dr. Hogan.
I think I'll step over to the microphone since I'll be talking for a minute. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about all the work that the task forces have done. In terms of an actual reopening plan, debating whether or not tonight we would bring a plan for your approval versus updates. The issue has been in the last week, things have changed more than they did in the last couple of months. And so the ability to bring a completed plan tonight was not going to happen. However, I want to give you updates on where our task force recommendations have been and just talk through that, and then we'll talk a little bit about how that will lead to a full plan here in just really the coming days. I don't have a clicker, so there we go, next. So first I want to thank everyone for their involvement. You heard some comments tonight. This was a big task with a lot of different people involved. So I definitely want to thank all of our task force leaders and the team members. So when I talk about task forces, it was made up of district administration leading out different groups. Those groups were made up of representation from building administrators, FHEA, FISPA, and parents. In addition, there were focus groups where they were able to get feedback from lots of different groups, including representatives from many of those areas as well as students. And so lots and lots of different input went into these processes. As you've heard a few different times tonight, and I'm going to echo it more than once, this has been a huge challenge to say the least. At no point were we able to just say, here's reality, let's make some firm plans and move forward. It's been every passing week, every passing day, even today it was literally every passing hour, led to some changes in thought process going into this. So we had a lot of fantastic people involved, a lot of smart people, a lot of hardworking people giving us really what's a robust set of recommendations for what a safe return to school would look like. I'll talk a little bit more about what some of those options will be. So disclaimer, I already gave one disclaimer. I'm just going to continue on the disclaimer route just for a minute. This is a rapidly evolving situation. Literally 3 weeks ago, we were 100% certain that we could open school looking mostly normal with some relatively minor adjustments. And, you know, the last couple of weeks, as you've heard many comments tonight, have really set some different things in place for us. And likewise, things that seem clear today may not be clear by the time August 24th rolls around. So there's just a lot to keep an eye on, and then that's not going to change for us. The bulk of the details you're going to see tonight are based around returning to school in person for most students. And the reason for that is as this work started to develop, at some point there was so much going on that the work had to be narrowed and some decisions had to be made. Well, 3 weeks ago, a month ago, it made most sense to really focus our effort around what does a safe in-person scenario look like with most of our kids attending. So what you're going to see tonight is recommendations based around that. But we also have the ability within our plans to switch to a hybrid plan. You've heard the word hybrid. So hybrid is typically defined as half of your students come on one day, half come on another day, and when they're at home, they're virtual. So what you're able to do is get much smaller numbers of kids in your building, but you're causing teachers to plan for every 2 days of instruction, one in person, one virtual, and flipping back and forth all of the time. It also causes for parents, daycare, childcare issues in terms of I need to be home on Tuesday with my kids, but on Wednesday they can go to school. So that's what a hybrid model looks like, and that's becoming more and more of a conversation around the region. Or the fully virtual model, which is really not what we did in the spring, but its basic idea that schools would be closed and all students would be learning virtually. I'll talk more about what virtual would look like. So really within this plan, the disclaimer is, tonight, I'm going to share what it would look like if we do return to school with most of our kids. But know that we also have plans that we can pivot to. Hybrid's going to still take some development because that's literally been a last 48-hour development for most districts to really seriously shift their energy towards talking about hybrid. Fully virtual we would be ready for even at this point as part of our plan. So I'll talk more about each of those as I go through it. So general information, this planning was really guided by 4 main ideas. One is provide as much physical spacing as possible. We've always heard 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet. You also can see some pediatric recommendations that say at least 3 feet. So we're very comfortable that we could at least hit that 3 feet, 4 foot physical spacing guidance even with most of our students being in school. 6 feet isn't something that would work out in a lot of places, but as much spacing as possible. Minimize of close contact. Health department, when they do contact tracing, they define it based on the CDC guidelines that exposure is considered closer than 6 feet for at least 15 minutes to a positive case. And so our plans are looking in terms of if we did have a positive case in our school, as much as we would rather not have any positive cases, the next step is to minimize how many other students, how many other staff might be exposed in this definition of close contact. Another big piece is educating staff, students, and families about appropriate actions regarding COVID. You can put all the rules in place you want, but as we've seen out in society, it's the human behavior that really drives whether or not your plans are effective. And so education around all of those things is very important. And then the last piece is to offer a fully virtual option for any student, any family who selects that. So that has always been a part of this plan, is to offer fully virtual for anyone who wants that choice. So what I'm going to do now is go through each of our 7 task forces to really highlight the main points of their recommendations that are driving what our ultimate plan is going to look like. So this first bullet is really something that has changed in the last couple of days and could change again before school starts. But as of this moment, right now, we plan to require masks when social distancing is not possible for all staff and for all students 3rd grade and up. That's an area we're watching closely. 3 weeks ago, I would have said they're recommended. It evolved to some version of strongly recommended. As of today, right now, we would say required. What happens between now and August? A lot of it depends on how well people follow these guidelines out in society and where we are when school reopens. We are not recommending health and symptom screenings at school. In talking with our health department, you hear a lot about temperature checks. The main issue with temperature checks is very many people are positive for COVID without ever displaying a temperature, without displaying a fever. And so if all you do is check people for a temperature, you get a false sense of security that, oh, you have no fever, therefore you must be okay. The other thing is logistics around doing that in terms of screening at a high school. You know, even if some of our kids choose virtual, are you screening 1,500 kids every single day? So in talking with our health department, they really do recommend much more effort around education of people. I don't want you to come to school, me tell you you have a fever or other symptoms, and then go home. What I want is that you don't come. If you know that you have a fever, you have other symptoms, just stay home. And that goes for our students, it goes for our staff. And so it's really more around those efforts of educating rather than screening them when they get here. Nursing clinics, I didn't go into it on the slide here, but there's going to be some very specific guidelines around our nursing clinics. Additional PPE, personal protective equipment, as well as other guidelines for how to care for typical kids coming into the office versus kids who are suspected or known to be positive of COVID. And we're also developing a communication plan around COVID to keep families and staff informed of positive COVID cases. This really gets down to a couple of main issues. We know that people want to know, much like you hear about all the information from the dashboard. People want to know how big of an issue COVID is, but there's also this layer that if you are potentially exposed to a positive case, you absolutely need to know that. So the health department will actually be involved in contacting directly individuals who through their contact tracing are deemed to have been exposed. So that's a very specific group of people who would hear from the health department. Our communication otherwise would say more something along the lines, your child is in a class where a positive case was identified, as anyone should, and literally everybody every day should be self-monitoring for symptoms, keeping a close eye on things. But we don't have any reason to believe you're at a high risk unless you hear from the health department. So some version of that communication is a protocol, and what we'll do before school starts is share that protocol so people don't wonder, when am I going to hear what? You know, if I'm a parent of a student at Independence, am I going to hear if a child at Henderson or a staff member at Howell Central was positive? So we'll share that ahead of time so people know what to expect. Logistics task force. This was just an impossible task force. Just everything's logistical when you talk about what a school will look like. And so in terms of a narrowed focus, we go back to those main points we started with. How are we going to space students out as much as possible? What would that look like? And so, space students out as much as possible, keeping all seats facing the same direction. That goes right along with keeping and enforcing consistent seating charts. So when we talk about contact tracing, again, the CDC definition is within 6 feet for at least 15 minutes. And so if I'm a child in the back left corner of a classroom and I'm positive for COVID, a student in the front right corner of the classroom would not be identified as at risk of exposure by the health department. And that's a piece that, in terms of educating our community, is important, because many people would say, well, I was in the classroom with somebody, I'm worried about my kid. Well, by all the guidelines we've heard, even talking about reports of how much is airborne versus just respiratory droplets, it's really, if you're outside of 6 feet, the health department is not going to say you need to go home and quarantine, because they're not going to consider you to have been in close contact. So the issue becomes, with a positive case, if a teacher didn't follow a normal seating chart, we would have no way of knowing, because typically a positive case, you're going to be thinking back to what was happening 2 days ago. If you can't point back to your seating chart, and I know that this kid sat here and this kid sat here, it's going to be impossible to trace. So those things are very important. Ideally, much like this room, if everybody was truly 6 feet, in theory, you're going to say no one was exposed because no one was closer than 6 feet for 15 minutes. In our situation, as we've talked about, yes, we're not talking about 6 feet in all cases. And in order to minimize that, we might say 2 kids might have been exposed to a kid with a positive case, but not 20 kids. And so thinking in terms of that. Eliminating non-essential opportunities for COVID transmission. That's talking about things like assemblies. Let's not bring our whole school, our whole student body into the gym for an assembly. I mean, some of these things come across pretty easily when you think about them, but we're so used to very many routines in schools, and we value what those mean for our schools. But this is going to be a year that if it's not essential to getting our kids educated, we may not be able to do it. When we talk about risk, there are some situations where you talk about a little bit of risk, but it is essential to keep our kids moving forward in their education. Some things are not. Reducing student numbers on buses. So buses is a hot topic as well. If you try for a 6-foot radius around every kid on a bus, you can put about 8 kids on a bus. Meaning we need to buy 6 times the number of buses we have, bus drivers, all of that. And so ultimately with buses, it would look like seating siblings together, limiting them to 2 per seat, loading from back to front, but knowing that, much like we talked about in classrooms, we do want to space kids out as much as we can so that a positive case doesn't lead to a whole bus full of positive cases, but it might lead to a couple of kids needing to be quarantined as well. So those are all of the things we talked with the health department about. Going back up to spacing students, that also is going to mean in classrooms getting rid of extra things around your classrooms. And I'll talk about that again later, but in order to best space out many of the things we have in classrooms, whether it's bookcases and other things, whether it's decorations, whether it's some of the honestly fun things that we have in classrooms, we might have to get rid of some of those in order to make room for more desks to spread out. Frequent hand washing and hand sanitizer available, and again we'll talk a little bit about it later, but we will have hand sanitizer available in every classroom. Hand washing does get harder. You can't have all of your students descend upon the few bathrooms we have all at once to wash their hands, so hand sanitizer for sure. And virtual meetings when possible, asking people to determine with every meeting you're considering, could we do this one virtually? Would it be effective and get the work done virtually? There will be times when face-to-face needs to happen, but looking first at virtual as an option. Instruction, so I'm going to talk about 2 different versions of this. The first is what in-person would look like. This is really all based on recovering from what happened last year during the closure. So first is identifying superhero standards. This is really a bump up from priority standards. We know that going into this year, we're going to have to review 4th quarter missed content. We're going to have to identify learning that was missed and figure out what of that was the most crucial that we need to circle back and make sure kids get, as well as what are we going to skip this year in order to make room for this learning that we have to circle back to. We can't just plow forward and expect that to work. So the superhero standards really speaks to, for this 3rd grade child to be ready for 4th grade next year, we need to identify what superhero standards they missed from 2nd grade and what we're going to focus on in 3rd grade to make sure at its very core they're ready to move on to 4th grade next year. So that's really what superhero standards is all about. Understanding assessment implications. We do a lot of benchmarking, a lot of upfront assessments. At first, we just need to get our kids in school and get them back to learning. So some of that time spent on assessment, we'll be looking critically at what is required, but more focus on that ongoing formative assessment for kids. So we know we will have to pay attention to where each child is in terms of their missed learning from last year and how they're progressing into this year. And then the last piece is preparing for potential closures. So if there's a time when we would need to close a building or a classroom or the whole district again, a month ago the health department told us they couldn't foresee that happening. They really thought through contact tracing and these measures, we wouldn't have to close whole buildings. And as of today, that may still be true. But we at least need to be prepared that that could happen. So then let's switch over to the virtual option. So all students will have this option. And basically what that means is when we put out, here's what in-person is going to look like. If as a family that works for you, great. If not, you can choose the virtual option. When possible, these will be taught by our own teachers who will then be selected as virtual teachers. So yes, we have options to put students into some of those online classes. We can put them through Launch, we can put them through some of our other choices. However, we would prefer that those get taught by our teachers teaching our curriculum to our students. And so that's really our first goal when it comes to who chooses virtual. This is where the big questions will be. Last spring, we really would not call that virtual learning. We would call that emergency remote learning. And so lots of families would say, I need to know what this is going to look like this year. So our recommendations are around this looking much more like typical school in terms of time and structure. And so envision 5 days a week, it's going to be virtual. It's not going to be just here's on Monday your work for the week, work on it. It would be more we're going to engage throughout the week. Think about a student instead of, okay, I'm going to be online with my teacher from 9 to 10 a.m. and then I'm left to do my work all day. Think instead, I'll be on with my teacher for 15 minutes at 9 o'clock, and then there'll be some time for me to go work and practice things, and I'll be back on with my teacher again at 10 o'clock, and we'll move on to the next lesson. And maybe even during my work time, there's a Zoom call open for me to interact and get questions, things like that. So think more in terms of those constant interactions throughout the day as opposed to cramming it all into one window of time and then leaving the student to work. That also, in theory, allows parents to support their child's work much differently. You're online for brief amounts of time, you're doing some work, then you're back getting back support from your teacher and all of that. Another thing you've heard tonight that will be better next year is we're focusing all elementary on Google Classroom and all secondary on Canvas. Canvas was already going to be rolling out next year at the high school level. We've moved it this spring to really be high school and middle school, and we offered training at the end of last school year, and we'll have some more training available heading into August. So that should hopefully answer parents' concerns about looking at all these different platforms, much more consistent. And then the last piece of virtual is we are asking families to commit for the first semester. In terms of planning, we have to change our staffing models in order to accommodate virtual instruction for our kids who choose it. If it were to be mid-October and families all say, all of a sudden we're no longer worried about COVID and we're just going to start coming to school, that's going to be, from a staffing perspective and everything else, not really doable. So we're asking families to commit for the first semester. As we near the end of the first semester, we'll know where we are with COVID, so we would talk about options for second semester once it's more clear what that'll look like. Mental health, there's a whole task force around mental health of our students and our staff. The first piece was to provide closure. Students are used to having an end of the year, saying goodbye to their classmates, saying goodbye to their teachers, having a normal way to have closure to a school year. They didn't get that. Especially our students who are going on to the next school. Our 6th graders this coming year, our 9th graders this coming year. So some closure exercises to help people process and work through that. We know that, especially in virtual situations, we need to do a better job of engaging families. Daily check-ins, we know that, you heard it during the MSBA report, talking about students and how they feel during these isolated times. Virtual is one thing, there's some isolation there, but as you saw, if you come to school and you're not allowed to interact with your friends in typical ways. So we're worried about mental health from that aspect, and we want to introduce consistent check-ins. Self-care and well-being, that's students and staff, keeping a focus on that. We know that as much as we talk about it was hard on kids, it was hard on our teachers as well. It was hard on our support staff. Everything was upended, and we need to understand that and help people work through that. Masks, we know that, and you see it when you go out in society, you get judged sometimes if you're wearing a mask, and you get judged sometimes if you're not. And equipping and educating all of our kids and our staff on the stigma around that, and making sure that we're not adding issues on top of COVID just because of reactions to masks or lack thereof. And then providing mental health resources for people and keeping people connected. Facilities, modifications of some workspaces. You may have seen crazy things about, oh, we're going to put every desk in a little plexiglass cubicle and all of that. That is not what we're working towards. But we do understand, especially in some high traffic areas, there are some accommodations some modifications that might need to be made. You can see one out here in our lobby with plexiglass around the welcome desk, things like that. Reduce extra items in classrooms, I mentioned that earlier. If you're going to move your desks out as much as possible, making enough space to do that the best you can. Signage for physical distancing, hand washing, just those reminders of those good practices and healthy practices. And then hand sanitizer in all classrooms I mentioned earlier. And then updated cleaning processes, that's a big question too. You know, how do we just ask our custodians who already have a full routine that they would typically do, and now we're going to say, but also you need to do a better job of nightly sanitizing and throughout the day sanitizing and all of this. So John Klein's working with his team to identify updated cleaning processes that understand what a custodian's workload looks like and how to make room to do better work around sanitizing specific to COVID. Human resources, I mentioned earlier that we want our teachers to teach those virtual classes. Well, that's a big task. How are we going to select those teachers? And this comes in all kinds of ways. We have some teachers who say, I'm very tech savvy, I love virtual education, I think I'm ready to do it. We have other teachers who say, I have underlying health conditions and teaching virtually feels safer to me. So we have lots of different reasons that people might be interested in teaching virtually. And so part of what we'll do is as we identify how many students are selecting virtual, we will also have to staff that. And so HR is working on that process. Employee support, FMLA is always there in terms of if there are health issues as a result of things, HR can certainly work through that with people. But the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, if I said that all right, is that's more of the temporary act around COVID to say we recognize that FMLA doesn't cover all possibilities. Here are some temporary supports that you can offer employees as well. And then we know that, especially with our high-risk employees, HR is trying to be proactive in working with people, but encouraging any employee to reach out and talk through their options. Substitute teachers, it's already an issue for districts. You already struggle to have enough subs, and that's not us. We actually do better than most of the districts around us, but it's still a struggle to have enough subs. Now you say we expect to encourage people to stay home when they're sick. We also expect that not all of our subs would be interested in working. And so in terms of subs, it's going to be even a higher need. So continuing to do what we can to make subs available. And then to now say not only do I need to be a substitute teacher, but you might be an online substitute teacher as well. So talking through what kinds of training we can offer there. Staff pay will be a big question, especially when it comes to extra duty things. Lots of questions about what if XYZ gets canceled, would staff still get paid? And so the best answer right now is some yes, some prorated, some canceled. And so we would talk about on a case by case as we move forward what kinds of things. Fall sports is one thing. Detention after school, lunch supervision, if I cover someone else's class on my plan, they all kind of fit into different categories. And so we'll work through that. HR is working through that process. And then examining teacher evaluation guidelines. What does it look like if I'm teaching in a whole different way and a principal comes in to observe me, I can't do some of the strategy that I would normally do. So working through that, HR is working through that as well. Technology, a lot going on in technology, but it's pretty easy to sum up. Supporting Canvas and Google Classroom training and utilization, so getting everyone ready to roll out virtual teaching. Device and hotspot distribution, and this really comes in 2 points. One, for families who say, I'm choosing the virtual option for next year, but I need a device or I need internet connectivity, that's step one. The next one is preparing for if we have a full closure or a building closure, being ready for a rapid distribution. Last spring was really a lot came together. We thought we would come back from spring break, and then things changed so quickly that we didn't. So in the fall, ideally, if we do start in person, ideally we would see it coming with at least a few days' notice in order to get devices in the hands of kids in a more efficient way. So technology is working on that as well. So that is a run through of all of the task force updates as they stand right now. In terms of, you're going to hear, literally there was a superintendent call this afternoon. I had a health department meeting this morning. Different answers today than I might have given you 2 days ago. You're going to hear more and more schools, especially in St. Louis County, are talking about a hybrid model. A couple are batting around starting fully virtual. The fact is, we could all be talking fully virtual if things continue to rise. We could all be talking hybrid if that's what makes more sense, or we could continue considering in person. To look in the crystal ball right now today and say that any one of those is for sure the option that's going to be in front of us in August is not something I can offer. All I can offer is we're going to work to make sure that our plans will support any of those. Full disclosure, hybrid's one we've got to put some work on. And really the districts, when you start hearing it, 2 days ago they weren't talking about it either, and now all of a sudden in St. Louis County a lot of them are saying, okay, I guess we better get a hybrid plan together. So we'll have some work next week on what a hybrid plan might look like for us as well, but there's a lot. Logistically, it's pretty easy in terms of some things, but there's a lot of implications of that as well. So all of that being said, what kinds of questions could I answer tonight?
I will go first here. How do we, so we released this plan on Monday. How do we plan on getting answers to our staffs and our parents and our kiddos? There's going to be so many questions.
So the plan itself will have a lot of bulleted information that answers a lot of the highlighted things I talked about today, but maybe in a little more detail, but enough to get a general sense of what things look like. We also are working on, like HR will have a big document with FAQs and a lot of very detailed information. Where do I go? How do I answer this question? All of that. We're also we're working right now on providing principals more detailed information as well to work through with their staff. We recognize that our staff needs a different level of information than our parents. Our parents need to know enough about what school is going to look like, but they don't necessarily need to know the process for some detail of what the day, where teachers would need to know that. And so our principals are looking to have, and they're various times on Monday, but virtual meetings with their staff to be able to really dig into the details with their staff, and we'll be providing more detailed, obviously more detailed than the summary tonight, but also the plan that's going to get released publicly, there will be more detail offered behind the scenes for our teachers as well. So teachers will both see the plan the public is getting and have a chance to debrief and process around much more detail, and then later that day is when we would put the plan out publicly. So teachers will see it that morning and have a chance to really dig into it before it goes out to our community.
So we're gonna get it Monday, but odds are it's gonna change between now and when school opens,
So yeah, it is changing, right. So the plan itself, and what you're gonna start to see from most districts, is the plan will say, here are some general guidelines, but just know that the actual option could be in person, it could be hybrid, it could be we're going to start in a full closure. Like, we sure hope that doesn't happen, but that's on the list of options. And then, but all of them, there will be an underlying, yes, I can choose virtual for my kid no matter what. So even if we started in a full closure, you would have some kids that they've chosen virtual anyway, so that when we do get back into school, they would stay in the virtual track. So yes, which plan we go with would change, even some of the details about mask wearing, the details about, if new science comes out and says the latest, like literally today, the health department said they are not concerned about airborne transmission of this. They're worried about respiratory droplets, which are affected by gravity, and they don't travel through the air to the other side of the room. Now, as Patrick said earlier, if you're singing, they do travel farther. If you're doing other things, they do travel farther. But it's not the same as they're in the air, right? Well, that's based on the studies they've looked at, the studies that exist so far. That's the answer today. Additional studies on any of this can always guide us to a different answer between now and August 24th. So we're going to continue to keep an eye on that guidance.
So my only other comment would be that I would be much more comfortable if we did require masks if there is in-person learning.
Yep, and as of today, that is where our plan will go. Now, like I said, as of a few days ago, it would have said strongly recommended. We'll keep an eye on the situation between now and August 24th, but as of today, we intend to release the plan with masks required.
Thank you.
When do you anticipate having the parents make a decision, the final decision on that? Just from the logistics standpoint, of
Correct.
having to figure out what teachers are doing what?
So we're putting out the information Monday along with the survey to parents saying, once you've had a chance to process what you see, here's your survey, and I believe it's going to close the following Sunday. So we'll have about 6 days to both read through the plan, ask questions what they need to do, and then give us their answer. So before the end of July, we should have those numbers.
I did not hear much about SPED in minutes and parents as teachers, what we're going to do with that group of parents that we work with, and then support staff, where we stand there if we go fully virtual this fall.
So in terms of SPED, I know Dr. Vanderpool is looking at what are all the ultimate recommendations going to be, and then working with his team, because so much of that is based on each individual kid and the needs driven by their IEP. And virtual gives one set of answers. In-person can answer a lot of those things because many of those services could happen if we're in an in-person setting. But working individually through IEPs on that. In terms of support staff, you're talking about if we're fully virtual. That's a question that we addressed when it came up in the spring, and quite honestly, we'd have to come to the board and talk about that again in the fall. We do know one of the options that HR looked at is in the spring, there were sectors of the community that found a furlough to be advantageous for families, for employees, because they could access some emergency money that actually worked out very well for them. In terms of decisions made around what does employment look like for people, what does pay look like, that would be an issue we have to talk about and we have to tackle. Right now, we don't anticipate starting in a full closure. We anticipate starting either with most of our kids in school, or as I've mentioned, a lot of districts are starting to talk hybrid. In either case, that means your staff's at school. That means your staff are actively doing what they would normally do for us, although obviously under some different circumstances.
So I'm looking at this from the school nurse perspective. As in the nurse's office, you mentioned that there were going to be protocols and everything. Will we also be changing our guidelines of when we're sending students home and how long they'll be required to stay home if they are sent home from the nurse's office? And will there be plans in place what to do when those aren't followed?
Yes.
When somebody comes back the next day when they were specifically told to stay home?
So let me just start there. Right now, if a student is suspended, that shows up in their attendance. So if I'm the teacher, that kid shows up in my class tomorrow, I'm taking attendance, I realize, oh, you're not even supposed to be here. Something similar with a code if they were sent home with symptoms, because we do have very specific guidance around symptomatic people, both students and adults. And we have employees right now who, if they're feeling any symptoms of any sort, they are going home, and they're supposed to be home 72 hours after becoming symptom-free. So we do have those protocols that nurses will have, and the health department would say it's not a subjective list, it's very objective. Here's the steps you're supposed to follow. And it is different for, I'm feeling symptoms, but I don't know that it's COVID, versus a positive COVID case, versus I live in a home with someone who's positive for COVID, what does that mean for me? So they all have different guidelines, but nurses will have all of that very, very laid out for them.
Yeah, I want to thank you for coming out here and being honest with us in the community and saying we really don't know. That's one of the hardest things that people can do. I mean, we pride ourselves on being a data-driven district where we base our decisions based on data. And with the data constantly changing, ever evolving and moving, we're trying to chase the data to make informed decisions that are best for our kids, staff, and the community. So I just want to thank you for all the hard work that you and everybody else has done and put into this, and for giving us the best you can as of today with the full knowledge that it can change. So thank you.
I appreciate it, and we definitely want to echo much of what you heard tonight too. Safety of our students, safety of our staff is absolutely top of mind for us. And sometimes when you talk about reopening, it sounds almost like you're not thinking about that because you're talking about bringing people into school. But we definitely listen to our health department on all of the details. And this idea that when we do get people back in school, if that's August 24th, if there's a decision made to change it, COVID will still be in our society when students are going back into school buildings. That's a fact. And so finding a set of circumstances that we can genuinely say we believe this is a safe environment for our students and for our staff is absolutely something we are spending a lot of time on. And so even if our ultimate recommendation is we do want to see people in school as much as possible, it is a statement of us saying with the guidelines we have in place, we do believe this is a safe decision to make. So we are definitely thinking of that. We're not discounting that when we look through our plans. And within the HR task force, there's a lot of things to look at for individuals who may be less safe than others. There are some options there as well. Any other questions I can speak to? All right.
Thank you.
I'm just going to stay here because the next agenda item is also me.
That's all you. Okay.
So next up is just my comments. So this is just my chance to talk, I guess. I have to say, when I envisioned what my first board meeting as superintendent looked like, the agenda looks a little different than I might have drawn up in my head, you know, months and months ago when I first was looking forward to this. Obviously, this is normally a time when we're really excited about the vision for the next year and our new initiatives and the new things we're rolling out. And unfortunately, much of what you've heard about tonight has caused us to have to spend all our energy elsewhere. And so COVID has been top of mind for really all of us all summer long. I mean, you've got people in this building who normally would have been taking vacations to go wind down a little bit, and that's not happening. Instead, we're here working on this. And I don't mean we, like, feel sorry for us in this building, but our teachers, our support staff, they're coming into meetings when they normally would have been on vacation as well. And so it has really changed our whole outlook for what a summer looks like preparing for a new year of learning. And it's been difficult for everyone involved. And so I still want to echo what I started the last presentation with, which is just a big thank you to everybody involved. We're hearing lots of comments from people, appreciating the hard work, appreciating the tough decision making that has to happen. And we appreciate hearing that because, you know, ultimately some decisions that are going to have to be made soon don't have a clear right answer. There's, in some cases, let's say masks for example, it is not possible to give an answer that will make everyone satisfied. And so it's been an interesting first couple of weeks on the job, to say the least. But I appreciate everyone around me. So many people have reached out and offered great feedback, great input, and great teamwork to at least help us build the best plans we can, while everyone doing it knows that these plans could change on us. So people putting their time in has been extremely valuable, and I just want to say another thank you for that. And the other piece I want to talk about during my comments is one of the things I'm excited to spend my time on is this year beginning to get some tangible things in place around equity and inclusion. I know that with the diversity of our students and the ultimate lack of diversity among our staff right now, we've got a lot to talk about and a lot of work to do, and not just some staffing. We can talk about curriculum, we can talk about programming, we can talk about a lot of different things in our district and in our community. And I'm excited that we can ride this current momentum into some actual action. I think it's easy to talk about things, it's easy to try to put good words on things. But I am committed and I am very interested in seeing through some actions around equity and inclusion for all of our students. We know that we pride ourselves on doing a good job for all of our students, but we also know that recent months have really highlighted what we have not always done for our Black and brown students and their families in our community. And so I just want to say it publicly that this work that I am committed to, it is work that I'm excited about, and I'm looking forward to both presenting to the board and to the community in future meetings actions that show that these words were actually had momentum behind them and will lead to actual tangible things that you'll be able to see.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hogan. We are moving on to board comments. And I would like to go first here with a statement from your Francis House School District Board of Education. The Francis House School District Board of Education pledges to our learning community that we will speak firmly against any racism, discrimination, and senseless violence against people regardless of race, ethnicity, nationality, immigration status, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, or ability. We will promote racial healing, especially for our Black students and families. We will no longer be silent. The Francis House District Board of Education stands firmly against all acts of individual and systemic racism. We commit to becoming allies in the struggle to foster better understanding and a socially just community. We will openly talk, challenge, and confront racism. As a school board and district, we value each and every student, family, and staff member. We are committed to creating an equitable and anti-racist system that honors and elevates all, but one that will also specifically acknowledge the challenges faced by our Black students and families. We embrace our organizational responsibility to ensure that the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion are integrated into the culture, curriculum, policies, programs, operations, and practices of the Francis House School District. The Francis House School District Board of Education hereby declares that racism is a crisis that negatively impacts our students, our families, our community, and our staff. The board hereby declares its commitment to establishing, supporting, and sustaining a culture of anti-racism. We see you, we hear you, we are listening, and we are learning.
Thank you.
Any other board comments? Okay. All right. Moving on to our upcoming meetings. Do we have anything on August 20th to add and subtract?
I got some to subtract. Your preliminary map data is already on the screen, so you've seen the update since, we didn't have a map.
Perfect.
So we're not going to have an update there. MSIP 6 and ESSA we'll have to see. Things have been in a state of flux, so I'll leave that on there for now, but that may not end up on the agenda by the time we get there.
Okay. And September 16th. Good for now? Okay. I would like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting. So said it earlier.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Great job. How are you? It is hot.
Or maybe I have Well, I don't need to push him. Well, let's do a whole